Imagine working for years to pay off debt and finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. For Thomas, a quiet, hard-working man from Maine, that light wasn't just about money, it was about hope. He believed that getting rid of debt would mean getting his marriage back on track. 9 credit cards, all of them gone. He had followed Dave Ramsey's debt-free plan to the letter, saving, cutting back, and sacrificing every comfort to make it happen. For the first time in years, the air in their home felt lighter. No more collection calls, no more constant anxiety about bills piling up on the kitchen counter. Thomas thought, "We did it. We're finally on the same team again." But beneath the surface, something wasn't right. His wife smiled, but her silence was heavy. She didn't celebrate the victory the way he expected. When Thomas talked about budgeting, she'd change the subject. When he suggested saving for the future, she'd roll her eyes. Still, Thomas didn't want to push. He told himself she was just adjusting, that once the pressure lifted, they'd finally be able to enjoy life again. He had no idea that the peace he'd worked so hard for was already starting to crack, because what looked like financial freedom was about to become a different kind of prison. But that wasn't the whole story, because what happened next would turn his idea of partnership completely upside down. One evening, Thomas sat down at the kitchen table to check their finances, something he'd done countless times before. The numbers didn't make sense. A new balance had appeared on one of the cards they'd already paid off. Then another. Then a third. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe a refund or a system error. But the more he looked, the more it became clear. His wife had started using the credit cards again. Not just one, not two. Multiple. When he finally asked her about it, she didn't hesitate. No guilt, no apology, just a sharp, almost defiant look. And then came the sentence that shattered everything Thomas thought he knew about their marriage. "My money is none of Dave Ramsey's business, and none of yours." Those words hit harder than any financial blow. This wasn't about dollars or credit cards anymore. It was about trust. Thomas had believed they were fighting the same battle. But now, it felt like they were standing on opposite sides of the war. He couldn't understand why she'd go back to the very thing that had caused them years of stress. She said she was tired of living under rules, tired of counting every penny, tired of hearing the name Dave Ramsey like it was some kind of religion. Thomas sat there in silence, staring at the woman he thought he knew. The woman he'd just helped climb out of debt, and realized he didn't recognize her anymore. It wasn't just spending, it was rebellion. A quiet, calculated way of saying, "You don't control me." And that's when Thomas realized the problem wasn't about money at all, it was about power. But as he soon found out, power struggles inside a marriage don't stay quiet for long. When Thomas's letter made its way to the Ramsey show, co-host John Delony read it out loud, and for a moment the entire studio fell silent. It wasn't just another money fight, it was deeper, more painful, the kind of story that makes people shift in their seats. Delony's voice softened. "If Thomas were here right now," he said, "I'd take out my earpiece and give him a hug. Because this wasn't about credit cards. It was about resentment, control, and broken trust. Thomas had spent years trying to fix his marriage through financial discipline. But to his wife, that discipline felt like dominance. Every spreadsheet, every no at the store, she didn't hear love or teamwork. She heard control. And while Thomas saw her spending as recklessness, she saw it as freedom. Freedom from being told how to live. Freedom from the endless talk about budgets and rules. In Delony's words, the couple wasn't fighting about money. Money was just the weapon. The real war was emotional. Dave Ramsey nodded quietly. He'd seen it hundreds of times. Couples get trapped in this cycle. One partner tries to take control to fix the problem, the other rebels to reclaim their independence, and suddenly the home becomes a battlefield. Ramsey said, "If you turn my name into a cuss word in your house, you did not accomplish a thing." Because once the issue stops being about money, it turns into something much darker, a battle for respect. Thomas didn't realize it yet, but his marriage wasn't in a financial crisis anymore. It was in an identity crisis. And the moment one partner feels unheard or unseen, every dollar spent becomes a declaration of war. But the war had only just begun, because what came next would tear their home apart in ways Thomas never expected. By the time Thomas realized how bad things had gotten, it was too late. What used to be calm conversations about bills had turned into shouting matches. Every receipt, every purchase, every mention of money became a spark in a room full of gasoline. She accused him of trying to control her. He accused her of destroying everything they'd worked for. Neither one was listening anymore. Delony called it a full-blown civil war. "You're not trying to solve problems anymore," he said on the show. "You're just throwing grenades." And that's exactly what it felt like. Two people once united, now taking shots at each other with words that cut deeper than debt ever could. Thomas's wife refused to talk about money at all. She wouldn't open the budgeting app. She stopped showing him her statements. She even applied for a new credit card, behind his back. When Thomas asked why, she said it wasn't about the money. "It's about respect," she said coldly. "I don't need you, or Dave Ramsey, telling me how to live." But deep down, both of them were hurting. Thomas wasn't angry because of the money. He was heartbroken because he felt betrayed. And she wasn't spending to be reckless. She was spending to feel alive again. That's the secret truth behind most money fights. They're not really about numbers. They're about power, pain, and the need to be heard. Ramsey put it bluntly. This is contempt. And once contempt enters a marriage, you've lost respect. Your need to serve them and love them is gone. That word, contempt, echoed in Thomas's mind, because somewhere along the way, love had been replaced by bitterness. And debt. That wasn't the problem anymore. It was just the symptom. But Thomas wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Because what he did next would decide whether this marriage could be saved, or if it was already too far gone. Thomas had always believed that hard work could fix anything, even love. But this time, no spreadsheet, no baby steps, no debt-free plan could fix what was breaking. Weeks passed. The silence between them grew heavier. They'd stopped eating dinner together. She came home late. He'd stay up, staring at the kitchen table where their old budget binder still sat, untouched. He didn't recognize his home anymore. The laughter, the teamwork, the shared dreams, gone. Replaced by cold glances and separate lives under the same roof. Then came the final blow. One morning, Thomas checked their joint account and nearly dropped his phone. Thousands of dollars were gone. A new card balance, another secret purchase. He wasn't even angry this time, just empty. Because now it wasn't about money, it was about truth. He asked her why. Why keep doing this? Why tear apart everything they built? And her answer cut through the air like a blade. Because I'm done living like a child. I'm done being told what I can and can't do. That was the moment Thomas realized something painful. This wasn't about budgeting or financial advice. It was about freedom. But her idea of freedom came with a price he wasn't sure he could keep paying. When he called into the Ramsey show, his voice shook. He wasn't looking for tips or percentages. He was looking for hope. Delony's response was quiet, almost fatherly. This isn't a money fight anymore, Thomas. It's a heart fight. And Ramsey, who's seen thousands of couples fight through financial chaos, gave the hardest truth of all. You can't fix this with math. You can only fix it with humility. Thomas sat there listening. The same man who once thought paying off debt would save his marriage now faced a reality that terrified him. He could lose everything not because of money, but because of pride. And what he chose to do next would change everything. Thomas couldn't sleep that night. The echo of Ramsey's words, "You can only fix it with humility," kept running through his head. He'd spent years fighting the wrong battle. Every argument, every tense conversation, every "we need to talk" wasn't about money. It was about control. For so long, Thomas believed that being the responsible one made him right. But now, staring at the empty side of the bed, he began to wonder, what if being right didn't matter anymore? He decided to do something he'd never done before. Stop fighting. The next morning, instead of another confrontation, Thomas simply said, "I'm done trying to win. I just want us to stop losing." Those words hit differently. His wife didn't respond at first, but for the first time in months, she didn't yell back either. Because deep down, they both knew. They were exhausted. The war had drained everything from them. The love, the laughter, even the reason they started fighting in the first place. Delony had called it laying down your sword, and that's exactly what Thomas was doing. Not as surrender, but as a plea for peace. He suggested something unexpected: counseling. Not budgeting classes, not a financial plan. Just two people sitting down with someone who could help them listen again. She hesitated, but something in her eyes softened. Maybe it was the first time in a long time she'd seen him speak without anger. Maybe she missed the version of them that worked together instead of against each other. Whatever it was, she finally said quietly, "Maybe we should talk to someone." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a miracle. But it was a start. For Thomas, that was enough, because after months of shouting and silence, he'd learned that sometimes strength isn't about standing your ground, it's about stepping back. But even as hope flickered back into their lives, the future was still uncertain, because learning to rebuild trust isn't a plan you can follow. It's a choice you make every single day. The first counseling session was awkward. They sat across from each other, arms crossed, eyes down, both waiting for the other to speak first. The therapist asked one simple question, and it hung heavy in the room. "When was the last time you felt like you were on the same team?" Thomas couldn't remember. Neither could she. For years, their marriage had been measured in numbers: the size of their debt, the balance in their savings, the cost of their mistakes. But somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten how to see each other. It wasn't about the credit cards anymore. It wasn't about Dave Ramsey, budgets, or spreadsheets. It was about two people who had built a wall of resentment so tall they couldn't even see the person on the other side. Week after week, they started to talk, not about bills, but about why money had become a weapon. She admitted that every time he mentioned debt or budget, she felt judged, like a failure. And he admitted that every time she hit a purchase, he felt betrayed, like his love wasn't enough. It was raw, uncomfortable, and painful. But slowly, piece by piece, the wall began to crumble. Thomas stopped tracking every penny in silence and started asking questions with compassion instead of frustration. She started sharing receipts, not because she had to, but because she wanted to rebuild trust. And in one quiet moment, sitting on the couch after counseling, she looked at him and said, "I know I messed up, but I don't want to fight anymore. I just want us back." Thomas didn't say anything. He just nodded. And for the first time in months, smiled. The healing didn't happen overnight, but something had changed. They were no longer opponents keeping score. They were partners again, rebuilding from the ruins, brick by fragile brick. Because in the end, marriage isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about who's willing to keep showing up, even when it hurts. But as Thomas would soon learn, rebuilding trust doesn't end the story. It only sets the stage for one last, life-changing choice. Months later, the house felt different. Not perfect, but peaceful. The kind of peace that doesn't come from numbers in a bank account, but from finally understanding what truly matters. Thomas still handled the bills, but he did it with openness, not authority. His wife still spent money, but she talked to him about it, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. For the first time in years, they weren't trying to win. They were trying to understand. And one night, as they sat together at the kitchen table, the same place where their arguments used to begin, she looked up and said, "You know, maybe Dave Ramsey isn't the enemy after all." Thomas laughed softly, not because of the joke, but because of what it meant. That sentence, simple as it was, carried months of pain, growth, and healing. He realized then that the real battle was never about money. It was about fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being judged, fear of not being enough. They had both been drowning in that fear, using money as their weapon, when what they really needed was grace. Thomas finally understood the truth Ramsey had hinted at all along, that financial peace doesn't come from paying off credit cards. It comes from humility, unity, and forgiveness. Money can destroy relationships, but it can also rebuild them if you learn to see it for what it is, just a tool, not a measure of love. And as Thomas looked across the table, watching his wife smile again, he knew something deep down. They hadn't just fixed their finances. They'd saved their marriage. Because in the end, the hardest truth wasn't about debt or spending. It was about freedom. And real freedom doesn't come from cutting up credit cards. It comes from letting go of pride.